For years, I heard stories about disappearances, unexplained encounters, and strange events that took place in remote locations. I always believed that most of those stories had a rational explanation. Maybe people were mistaking ordinary situations for something supernatural. Maybe fear was turning coincidences into mysteries. But after hearing 3 different accounts involving remote forests, I began to question that belief. The strangest part was that none of these people knew each other. They lived in different places. They had completely different lives. And yet, they all shared one thing in common. They entered the forest, and they encountered something they could never explain. The woman in white. 3 days ago, my girlfriend Katie and I returned from what was supposed to be one of the most enjoyable hiking trips we'd ever taken. Instead, it became something neither of us can explain. Even now, sitting at home and trying to write this down, I still struggle to understand what happened out there. Katie and I have always loved the outdoors. We've hiked through forests, mountains, and national parks all across the country. Spending days away from civilization was nothing new for us. That's why this trip seemed so ordinary at first. We had planned a 4-day hike through a remote section of the mountains in upstate New York. The area was beautiful, with endless forests stretching across the landscape and very few signs of human activity. The first day went exactly as planned. We spent hours hiking through the mountains before setting up camp, near a clearing surrounded by tall trees. We ate dinner, talked for a while, and eventually went to sleep. Sometime during the night, I woke up and noticed Katie sitting upright beside me. Even in the darkness, I could tell something was wrong. She looked terrified. I asked her what happened. At first, she struggled to answer. Then she whispered that she had heard something outside the tent, something walking around us. I assumed it was an animal. There were plenty of deer in the area. But Katie shook her head. Whatever she had heard, she was convinced it wasn't an animal. I offered to check. As I reached for the zipper, she grabbed my wrist. "Don't open it," she whispered. The fear in her voice immediately made me hesitate. Then I heard it too. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, walking around the tent. We both sat completely still as the footsteps circled us. The sound was unmistakable. Whoever was outside was walking on 2 feet. Every few minutes, the footsteps would stop. Then we would hear a soft laugh. A woman's laugh. High-pitched, almost playful. But there was something deeply unsettling about it. Neither of us knew what to do. So we stayed silent and waited for morning. Eventually, the footsteps stopped. The rest of the night passed in complete silence. At sunrise, I carefully stepped outside. At first, everything looked normal. Then I noticed the rocks. Dozens of them. They surrounded our campsite. Small stones stacked on top of each other. Others arranged in strange patterns. I knew they hadn't been there the night before. Katie wanted to leave immediately, but I convinced her to continue. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe another hiker was playing some kind of prank. As strange as it was, I couldn't think of anything else. The rest of the day felt different. Katie constantly looked over her shoulder. She was convinced someone was following us. Every time I stopped and checked, I found nothing. No footprints, no movement, no signs of another person. Still, neither of us felt comfortable anymore. By late afternoon, we set up camp again. Katie begged me to head home the next morning. I agreed. Neither of us wanted another night like the first. Eventually, she fell asleep. I remained awake for a while. Just as I was beginning to drift off, I heard a whisper. My eyes snapped open. I looked at Katie. She was asleep. Then I heard it again. A woman's voice. Soft, gentle, almost soothing. "Come outside, Artie." My entire body froze. That was my name. Seconds later, another female voice spoke. "Come outside, Artie. We're waiting for you." I didn't move. I didn't answer. I barely breathed. The voices stopped. Then the running began. Footsteps raced around the tent. Not walking this time. Running. Fast. As they circled us, they laughed. The laughter was horrible. Wild. Uncontrolled. almost inhuman. Then one of the voices suddenly became deeper, louder, angrier. "Come outside now." Katie woke instantly. Panic spread across her face. Before I could explain anything, the tent shook violently. Something slammed into the side, then another impact, then another. It felt as if multiple people were pushing against the tent walls. At times they even managed to drag the tent slightly across the ground. All around us, the laughter continued. Neither of us knew what to do. We were completely terrified. Then, without warning, it stopped. The running ended. The voices vanished. Everything became silent. For nearly 30 minutes, Katie and I sat there without saying a word. Finally, I worked up the courage to look outside. Slowly, I unzipped the tent just enough to see through the opening. The man who vanished into the forest. A few years ago, I decided to leave behind the fast-paced city life and move to a small community surrounded by mountains and forests. I grew up in a noisy place filled with traffic, rushed people, and constant chaos. When I finally had the financial means to leave, I didn't hesitate. The town I moved to felt like a hidden paradise. There were only a few streets, a couple of restaurants, a gas station, a supermarket, and a small sheriff's office. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name and where almost nothing ever happened. I found a part-time job at the local supermarket. I only worked a few hours a day and spent the rest of my time exploring the trails and forests surrounding the town. It was exactly the life I had always wanted. It didn't take long for me to realize that the locals were incredibly friendly. They were always willing to chat, lend a hand, or simply wish you a good day. Everyone except one person. His name was Hector. The first time I saw him was on a cold morning, just after 5 o'clock. I had just parked outside the supermarket when a man suddenly appeared beside my car window. Instinctively, I jumped in surprise. Before I could react, he started screaming. He didn't seem angry. He didn't seem like he needed help. He simply screamed in my direction and ran away. Or rather, he skipped away, literally skipping down the street like a child. I stood there trying to process what had just happened. One of my co-workers noticed my confused expression and laughed. He explained that the man's name was Hector. According to the locals, he had been wandering around town for years. Nobody knew exactly where he lived. Some believed he was homeless. Others claimed he lived somewhere deep in the mountains. But everyone agreed on one thing. Hector was strange. Very strange. Over the following weeks, I started seeing him everywhere. It didn't matter what time it was. 5 in the morning, noon, 11 at night. Hector was always wandering around town. He was a short, muscular man with a long gray beard and clothes that always looked dirty. But what stood out the most was the way he moved. He never walked normally. He always skipped, as if he were completely disconnected from reality. One morning, while driving to work, I spotted Hector standing on a street corner. He was waving at someone. As I got closer, I realized something unsettling. There was nobody there, yet he continued smiling, waving, and talking as if he were having a conversation. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to ignore it. After all, everyone insisted he was harmless. At least that's what they said. A few weeks later, while hiking through a remote section of the forest, I heard something unusual. Voices. I was far away from any hiking trails. This area was practically untouched wilderness. Hearing people talking out there was extremely strange. I stopped and listened. It sounded like two people arguing. One voice was yelling. The other was responding. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly moved closer. The nearer I got, the clearer the conversation became. One voice sounded furious. The other sounded desperate. When I finally reached a dense cluster of trees, I hid behind a trunk and looked through the branches. The sight sent a wave of ice through my body. There weren't two people. There was only one. Hector. He was completely alone, talking to himself, but each voice sounded entirely different. It was like several people were trapped inside the same body. One voice insulted, another cried, another begged for forgiveness, another made threats. I had never seen anything like it. I remained hidden, silently watching. Then something happened that I will never forget. One of the voices suddenly changed. It became aggressive, violent, and then it shouted, "He's hiding behind the tree." My blood ran cold. Immediately, Hector turned his head and looked directly at me. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then I saw something I had never seen before. Rage. Pure, terrifying rage burned in his eyes. Without saying another word, he started running. He wasn't skipping anymore. He wasn't playing around. He was hunting me. I turned and sprinted as fast as I could. Behind me, I could hear his footsteps crushing leaves and snapping branches. He screamed constantly. He shouted that I wasn't going to leave the forest alive. He said he had finally found me. Sometimes he laughed. Sometimes he screamed. Sometimes it sounded like he was talking to other people while chasing me. His voice echoed through the trees. For several minutes, I ran without looking back. My only goal was to escape. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went silent. The screaming stopped. The footsteps disappeared. I didn't stop running until I reached the trailhead. I looked in every direction. Nothing. Hector was gone. I returned to town and went straight to the sheriff's office. I told her everything. At first, she seemed skeptical, but when I described the exact location where the encounter had taken place, her expression changed. She turned pale. After a long moment of silence, she revealed something disturbing. Years earlier, human remains had been discovered in that same section of the forest. The crime had never been solved. Nobody was arrested. Nobody was identified. As we talked, she remembered something even stranger. According to her memory, Hector had started appearing around town at roughly the same time those remains were found. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe it wasn't. The next morning, we returned to the area together. We searched for hours, but Hector wasn't there. In fact, Hector wasn't anywhere. Days passed, weeks passed, months passed, and nobody ever saw him again. It was as if he had vanished into the forest. To this day, I still go hiking. I still explore those mountains. But every time I walk beneath those trees, I feel the same sensation, the feeling that I'm being watched. And part of me still expects to hear footsteps emerging from the woods, or Hector's voice echoing through the trees. Because some people disappear, but some stories never do. The Forgotten Cabin. For as long as I can remember, my friends Theo, Carlos, and I have shared one tradition. Every year, no matter how busy life becomes, we spend a weekend together in the woods. We started doing it when we were teenagers. Back then, we were obsessed with exploring. Most kids spent their weekends at the mall or playing video games. We spent ours searching for hidden places, abandoned structures, old trails, caves, especially caves. There was something exciting about discovering places most people would never see. As we got older, our annual trips became less about adventure and more about friendship. But even then, we still enjoyed exploring whenever we stumbled across something unusual. That's exactly how we found the cabin. It happened during one of our yearly trips. We were hiking through a remote section of forest that none of us had visited before. The area was isolated. No trails, no campsites, no signs of civilization. Then, through the trees, we saw it. A small wooden structure, sitting completely alone in the middle of the wilderness. At first, we thought it might be a hunting cabin, but as we got closer, it became obvious that something was strange. There were no roads leading to it, no vehicle tracks, no signs that anyone had visited in years. The building itself looked ancient. Weathered wood, broken windows, a sagging roof. It looked abandoned. Naturally, we approached it, like every idiot in every horror movie. Even while walking toward it, we joked about how this was exactly how bad decisions begin. When we looked through the windows, we saw almost nothing inside. A few broken pieces of furniture, dust, debris, silence. Carlos was the first one to suggest going inside. None of us argued. After all, we'd explored plenty of strange places before. The cabin consisted of a single room. No electricity, no plumbing, No modern conveniences, just four walls and a roof. At first glance, there was nothing particularly interesting about it. Then we heard the sound, a scraping noise, slow, rhythmic, as if something heavy was being dragged across stone. At first, we couldn't tell where it was coming from. The room was small. There wasn't much space for the sound to hide. Yet somehow it seemed to echo through the entire cabin. We stood silently, listening. The sound continued. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. Then I realized something. The noise wasn't coming from around us. It was coming from beneath us. I knelt down and pressed my ear against the wooden floor. The sound became clearer. Something was moving underneath the cabin. Immediately, curiosity took over. We began searching the room, moving broken furniture, kicking aside debris, looking for any sign of a basement entrance. Eventually, we found it. Hidden beneath layers of dust, in one corner was a rusted metal handle, a trapdoor. For a few seconds, nobody moved. We simply stared at it. Then I grabbed the handle and pulled. The moment the door opened, a horrible smell exploded into the room. It was one of the worst odors I've ever experienced. Rotten, sour, like decaying meat left in the sun. The smell was so strong it made my eyes water. A wooden ladder disappeared into darkness below. The scraping sound immediately became louder. There was definitely something down there. Looking back now, opening that trapdoor was probably the biggest mistake we made that day. But curiosity won. It always does. I pulled a bandana over my nose, turned on my flashlight, and started climbing down. The temperature dropped instantly. It felt unnaturally cold, far colder than the outside air. When my feet finally touched the ground, I swept the flashlight across the room. The basement was surprisingly large. The floor was made of stone. Massive support beams stood in the darkness. Other than that, the room was empty. At least that's what I thought. Then I saw movement. A man slowly emerged from behind one of the support beams. I nearly screamed. He looked ordinary at first. A green t-shirt, blue jeans, dark hair. Nothing unusual. Yet something felt deeply wrong. The man limped as he walked. His right foot dragged across the stone floor. That scraping noise we had been hearing, it was him. He continued limping from one side of the room to the other, never looking at me, never acknowledging my presence. I called out to him, "Hey, are you okay?" No response, not even a glance. I tried again, still nothing. Then I noticed he was muttering something. Words, quiet words spoken under his breath. But I couldn't understand any of them. It wasn't English. At least I don't think it was. Slowly, I moved closer. The moment I did, the man stopped walking. Everything stopped. The muttering, the dragging, even the heavy breathing. He stood perfectly still. Then he slowly turned his head toward me. His eyes locked onto mine. A second later, the rest of his body followed. Now he was facing me completely. Staring. Not blinking. Not speaking. Just staring. Every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. Terribly wrong. I began backing away, one step at a time. The entire time, he never took his eyes off me. I finally reached the ladder. The moment my hand touched it, the man moved. Just one step. One single step toward me. Then he stopped again. That was enough. I climbed the ladder faster than I thought possible. When I reached the top, Theo immediately knew something was wrong. I told him we needed to leave. Right now, no questions. Before we ran, we looked down one final time. The man was standing directly beneath the ladder, looking up at us, one hand resting on the lowest rung, as if he were deciding whether or not to move. I'll never forget his eyes. They were completely empty. Not angry, not sad, not afraid. Empty. We slammed the trapdoor shut and ran. We didn't stop until we were far away from the cabin. Even then, none of us could explain what we had just experienced. Part of me wondered if it ended now. Another part of me never wanted to see it. Eventually, we reported the cabin to local authorities. Days later, investigators searched the property. They found a cabin. They found a basement. But they didn't find a man. There were no signs that anyone had been there. No food, no bedding, no personal belongings, nothing. They even checked missing person reports. Nobody matched his description. To this day, nobody knows who Henry was. Nobody knows why he was hiding beneath that cabin. Nobody knows where he went. Every year, Theo recalls, and I still take our food. The tradition continues. But now we follow one very important rule. If we ever find another abandoned cabin deep in the forest, we're turning around and walking the other way, because some mysteries are better left undiscovered. The forests in these stories may be hundreds of miles apart, different states, different people, different lives. Yet somehow, all of them walked into the woods and encountered something they could never explain. Maybe that's just coincidence. Or maybe there are things out there that we were never meant to understand. Things that exist far beyond the reach of roads, cities, and civilization. Things that prefer the darkness. And perhaps the most terrifying thought of all is that these stories may not be unique. At this very moment, somewhere in the world, someone is hearing footsteps outside their tent. Someone is discovering an abandoned structure deep in the woods. Someone is realizing they're no longer alone. And unlike these storytellers, they may never make it back to tell anyone what happened. If you enjoyed these stories, leave a like and subscribe for more true horror. And remember, the wilderness doesn't belong to us. We're only visitors. And sometimes, the forest watches back.